Well, as a precursor to this feedback session, I'm going to attempt to do it as if it would have been through Zoom because I was lacking a participant to do feedback with me. So I'll begin now. Well, welcome the Aven Venti family. Looks like we have mom and dad here and Bailey present. Is that correct? All right. So what we'll do is just review the assessments and the results that we have, as well as give some recommendations related to kind of that recent diagnosis of ADHD, as well as some cognitive strengths and weaknesses and academic strengths and weaknesses. So first, we'll start with what we got back from one of the main intelligence assessments, our WISC-5. So one of the strengths that we were able to identify was language development and kind of verbal skills. So those are going to be a strength to continue to use as far as verbal instruction. Sometimes it might be difficult when there's a lot of things written down and trying to comprehend it um, from written instructions, but it does look like language development and verbal comprehension can be a little bit easier. The next strength that we identified was processing speed and working short term memory. So, kind of being able to take in what's right in front of you was one of the strengths that we found. And this was demonstrated uh, through the intelligence test on kind of how you were able to remember some things and speak them right back to me. So, I wanted to ask, is there any questions related to just some of those strengths that you heard right now? And I could imagine that that question about age appropriate, being still an adolescent, research does show that problem solving skills are still developing during this time. So um, that's something that we'll actually get into as the next step as a weakness. So, some weaknesses that were identified through our cognitive abilities testing was reasoning skills, induction skills, conceptualizing, and problem solving skills. So basically, being able to just kind of solve things and think about things uh, abstractly, kind of seeing like kind of the bigger picture, but how to solve things. It looks like that was a weakness. But like you just asked about, like, um, is this something maybe someone grows out of, or is it just due to your age? It could. Research does show that this stage of development, the adolescent age, teenage years, that problem solving skills can increase. So we'll get into some recommendations later, but I think that is a great question about age appropriateness and how accurate are these results. So now what we'll move into is more of the academic portion. So on our Wyatt 4, some of the strengths that we were able to identify was um, word reading as well as essay composition. So it kind of like we mentioned a little earlier, language development. It sounds like, and the testing gives evidence that reading um, is one of the strengths comparatively. So I was curious, and I remember you mentioning during our clinical interview that math isn't one of your strong suits, but that you do try a lot with reading. Is that correct? And that makes a lot of sense that you would give extra effort towards reading because it can be challenging and takes a lot of your attention and focus. So that's something that you would agree is that you've spent a lot of time trying to read and make up because you lack attention in those areas. Well, that makes sense to me. One of the weaknesses that we were able to identify as far as an academic strength was kind of reading comprehension. So being able to really understand those issues, which actually aligns kind of with some of those weaknesses in like reasoning skills and conceptualizing problem solving skills, being able to fully understand it can be difficult when it's kind of in that written form. And we also identified a relative weakness of numerical operations. So essentially, like how you work with numbers. And I remember during our clinical interview as well that you mentioned math wasn't your strong suit and you really didn't care for numbers too much. So it sounds like this sounds kind of accurate. Would you agree? Well, that makes sense that school has been challenging for you over the past few years. So that also gives evidence as to that recent ADHD diagnosis, as you mentioned. Some of the distractedness during the school day really doesn't help when it comes to paying attention and learning new material. And that's some of the overall what the both of the tests are showing is a little bit of that below average range, kind of low average to below average. And I think that even might be an indication that the timing was appropriate of this recent ADHD diagnosis. Is that something that you'd agree with? Or, yeah, any thoughts on the timing of the ADHD diagnosis and poor performance in school? So that makes a lot of sense that being in middle school and getting ready to transition to high school, there's a lot of thinking of the future and maybe what high school is going to work best, but as well as being involved in more social circles with volleyball and friends. And so just seeing that there are other skills in life and other experiences in life that mean a little bit more to you than pouring a lot more time into your academic endeavors, and that the timing of your ADHD diagnosis has given some insight into that. Is that correct? And another thing that I'm hearing is that you do want to put as much effort as you can to get through high school and to potentially even go to college. Is that correct? Well, this makes sense that the school related issues have a root within your attention, but it does sound like you can keep your short term memory and your working memory to help benefit you in the meantime. So now we can kind of transition into some recommendations. So one of the recommendations when it comes to ADHD or just some ways to just cope a little bit better, maybe when you're stressed or when you can't really pay attention to what you're reading or um, just some general guidance would be to maybe try out therapy, doing one-on-one therapy. There's lots of skills you could use for coping. One of the skills that came to mind is actually music therapy. There's some good research that shows adolescent aged um, ADHD diagnoses pair well with music therapy. Well, that makes a lot of sense that Bailey enjoys music and is always has her AirPods in. Maybe is that some way that you feel a lot better when you are um, able to just listen to music and let your mind wander, as well as just feel comforted by the experience of listening to music. Well, it's definitely going to be a recommendation to explore some therapy and see what are some coping skills you can have, maybe throughout the day, that help keep you present and focused for class when it's time for instruction specifically. The next recommendation that we can discuss is going to be potentially seeing like a CBT therapist and learning some of those CBT techniques to help alleviate the effects of the ADHD diagnosis, and as well as to help combat the lower intellectual abilities or just being on the low average of intelligence of some of those reports. Uh, so learning some CBT techniques, for example, knowing how to calm yourself down if you're feeling overwhelmed, or knowing how to process your thoughts if your attention is just getting so distracted. There are lots of good ways within CBT literature that can help with ADHD diagnosis. One of those things is going to be mindfulness, being able to identify your thoughts and then refocus back to the present moment. That could be a great skill to continue to learn as you are in your adolescent age, but as you continue to grow, it's a great skill to have for life. So, one of the things that we would recommend is CBT therapy. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Have you ever gone to therapy before? Do you have any experience with therapy like that? And that makes a lot of sense that you've been a little nervous to go to therapy, but now that you're getting older, you feel a little more confident and ready to take on going to therapy on your own and seeing exactly how you can get prepared to manage some of those symptoms of ADHD. Attention dysregulation can be really tough. And learning how to manage attention dysregulation can really help alleviate the symptomology or the symptoms that come with ADHD and potentially allow you to accomplish some of the goals that you're looking to accomplish. So, like graduating from high school and starting college, learning these skills now could be a great way to get a head start in those directions. Which actually leads into the last recommendation of contacting your school for accommodations or an IEP process. Could y'all fill me in? When I interviewed, I don't recall hearing that y'all had contacted the school for any accommodations or IEPs or 504 plans. Yeah, what's kind of going on there right now? Well, that makes a lot of sense that the first step in the process was to get your own diagnosis and to see your own through your insurance company get a diagnosis of ADHD, and then you happen to be able to follow up with getting this test, and which we can't necessarily confirm ADHD exactly, but we can see that when it comes to um, reading comprehension and processing numbers and reasoning skills and conceptualizing and problem solving skills, which do relate to symptoms of ADHD, we do have support that those weaknesses are present. So, now it does sound like your next step is going to be to contact the school and see what they're going to be able to offer as far as accommodations. So that's going to be the last recommendation here is to follow through and contact the school to see what can be helpful. For example, maybe there's extended testing time that the school might be able to offer Bailey. If she's finding it too distracting to be able to work on some tests, maybe they can give double time or extra time to allow her to focus and maintain her attention and perform better on exams. I'm curious, Bailey, is there anything that you're currently doing that you kind of just have asked for the teacher to allow you to do to help you focus more in class? Being able to check other people's notes in class and share notes, that could be pretty helpful because sometimes you might miss things um, when they're when during lecture if you're like trying to read the slides and listen at the same time, it can get a little confusing. Is that what I'm hearing? Well, that makes sense. Well, in the meantime, you can always just be asking, making simple asks to teachers, and just asking them, "Can I? Do you mind if I record the lecture, and so I can help listen to it again and take notes at a slower pace?" Things like that can be helpful in the time before you get any official accommodations. Well, are there any more questions before we end today's session? All right. Well, if you Need anything else, feel free to reach out.